20 years buried alive, and the guy who dug himself out is currently holding a grown man inside a stuffed teddy bear, like he's confiscating a toy from a misbehaving kid. That's where this story is going. Stick with me. A saint, one of the 12 most worshipped fighters on the planet, just got picked up like a bowling ball and launched through the floor by a guy wielding a bone that used to be his own arm. A billionaire just watched his $1 billion trophy weapon get crushed into dust between two bare hands, like it was a stale cracker. A goddess, an actual goddess, just had her connection to every single one of her believers sliced clean, like someone reached out and cut a puppet's strings. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a teenage boy rips off his own faction badge and throws it on the ground in front of his own god, because he'd rather stand next to a dead man than keep serving a fraud. None of that makes sense yet. Good. It's not supposed to. Because 2 decades ago, the strongest fighter humanity had ever produced got left to die in a hole in the ground by the 12 people who owed him everything. And what's happening right now? All of that chaos, all of that violence, all of that petty, glorious payback? That's just him saying hello again. Let's rewind. Let's see how a man goes from buried and forgotten to the guy every god on the planet is suddenly terrified of. This is a world where monsters don't stay in horror movies. They crawl out of rifts, they wreck cities, and the only thing standing between regular people and total extinction are awakened fighters, humans who get a boost of power and go toe-to-toe with things that shouldn't exist. At the very top of that food chain sit 12 saints, each one chosen by a god tied to a zodiac sign. 12 gods, 12 champions, and an entire world that worships the ground they walk on. Our guy isn't one of the 12. Not officially, not anymore. But 2 decades ago, he was the backbone that held the other 12 together. Call him Jian. He never had a god backing him up, never had that comfortable divine cushion protecting his body from backlash. Every fight he ever won, he won on raw skill, raw grit, and a body that paid for it in scars. That's the setup. Here's the gut punch. 20 years back, the deadliest raid humanity had ever attempted goes down. The target's a boss so dangerous it earns the nickname Crimson Eye, and Jian, plus his 12 so-called comrades, go in to end it. They win. But right when the fight's over, right when Jian's guard is finally down, one of his own trusted teammates walks up behind him and puts a blade in his back. Not a sword, not some cinematic weapon, an orange peeler. That's the level of disrespect we're working with here. They don't just stab him and run. They trap him inside a collapsing cave with the boss monster, seal the exit, and walk away like nothing happened. Then they take it further. They drain his bank accounts. They loot every relic he ever earned, and they rewrite the entire story, so the 12 of them become the heroes who sacrificed their friend to win the day, while the real hero rots underground, forgotten by the same world he bled for. 20 years pass. Down in the dark, alone, broken, watching imaginary versions of his old friends live comfortable, celebrated lives while he waits to die. That's Jian's reality. It's the kind of despair that would break most people permanently. Except something else is happening to him down there. While the world builds statues of the 12 frauds, Jian's body is going through a transformation nobody planned for. He's not dying. He's evolving. A brand new power is stitching itself into his soul, a constellation nobody else has ever held. The 13th seat. Something the old zodiac system was never built to include. 20 years of pain distilled into one door swinging open, and a new god walks out. He steps out of that tower and the very first calamity dumb enough to cross his path, a high-tier monster that could have flattened a small town on a bad day, doesn't even get a fight. Jian just steps on it. Not metaphorically, actually steps on it like it's a bug that wandered too close to his boot. Then he catches his reflection. Down in that tower, his body was wrecked, missing an arm, scarred everywhere, a living record of every terrible thing that happened to him. And now, perfectly restored, younger, whole. Like the universe looked at everything that was stolen from him and decided to give it all back, with interest. That's beat 1. Full power, fresh body, 0 people who know he's alive. That's a dangerous combination for the 12 people who left him to rot. He doesn't march straight into revenge, though. First, he saves 2 kids from a monster attack, because apparently being betrayed by 12 so-called heroes didn't kill the actual heroism in him. One of those kids is a teenager named Sunjai, and it's through him that Jian gets his first real look at how badly the world got the story wrong. Sunjai idolizes the 12 saints. Of course he does. Everyone does. But when Jian starts asking questions, quietly pulling the thread on what actually happened during the Crimson Eye raid all those years ago, the story doesn't hold up. Piece by piece, he learns exactly how thorough the theft was. His name, buried. His wealth, gone. His legacy, wearing someone else's face. So he goes to Sunjai's house. Not for revenge yet, just to look. And what does he find? Fake relics. Cheap knockoffs being passed around like they're sacred artifacts connected to the great sacrifice of a hero who supposedly died protecting everyone. Jian looks at these fakes, and something in him just snaps into focus. He destroys them. All of them. Doesn't even raise his voice doing it. Then a group of arrogant disciples from the Gemini faction show up talking big, throwing their god's name around like it makes them untouchable. Jian doesn't even treat it like a fight. He handles them the way you'd swat away a fly that's been buzzing near your food for too long. Quick, dismissive, over before they even register what's happening. That's the first taste. Here's where it stops being a taste and starts being a statement. A queen spider, a genuinely nasty calamity, tears into a crowded supermarket. Panic everywhere, people running, the kind of scene that would usually take a full team of awakened fighters and a lot of luck to survive. Jian walks in and turns it into a massacre. Not the people, the monsters. He clears the entire infestation solo, and in doing it, he exposes something huge. The Aries Saint, a guy named Yang Wei, greedy, cowardly, exactly the kind of person who'd stab a friend in the back for a promotion, was supposed to be handling this threat. He wasn't. Jian catches him completely unprepared, completely exposed, and beats him into the dirt without breaking a sweat. And then, because Jian apparently has a very specific sense of humor, he doesn't just defeat Yang Wei, he seals the man's soul inside a stuffed teddy bear. Yeah, that's the moment from the top. That's how we got there. While Yang Wei is stuck being a plush toy, Jian strolls into the Ares vault and helps himself to everything that was stolen. His gold, his relics, his legacy, sitting there gathering dust under someone else's name. He takes it all back. Then he sends a message to every media outlet on the planet. Picture of Yang Wei, the mighty Ares Saint, supposedly the guardian of an entire faction, trapped inside a teddy bear like a naughty toddler's punishment. That's not subtle. That's not supposed to be subtle. That's Jian telling the other 11, loud and clear, I'm back, and I know exactly what you did. In the middle of all this chaos, there's a reunion that actually softens the whole thing for a second. Hugo Otter, the Sagittarius Saint, the one member of the original 12 who never turned on Jian, never took a cut of the stolen wealth, never lied about what happened, finds out his best friend is alive. Hugo doesn't hesitate, doesn't ask questions first. He just breaks down crying and grabs Jian in a hug so aggressive it's basically a tackle. 20 years of grief, released in one moment. These two have the kind of friendship built on constant insults and absolute bone-deep loyalty. And watching Hugo finally get his brother back is the one purely warm beat in an otherwise ruthless comeback story. It's also through Hugo that we meet the rest of his family, including his daughter Yoha. And Yoha does not do subtlety. She takes one look at the legendary, resurrected, freshly de-aged war hero standing in front of her, and immediately declares she's going to marry him. Out loud. In front of her father. Hugo's reaction is exactly what you'd expect from an overprotective dad watching his daughter propose to a walking apocalypse survivor. Pure, sputtering panic. It's funny. It's also going to matter later, so file it away. Now, the retaliation doesn't stop with one saint in a teddy bear. Jian's next stop is a relic appraiser, trying to get a read on what else got stolen and where it ended up. That's when Sophie Marty shows up. The Aquarius Saint. Vain, self-absorbed. The type who spent years soaking in praise she never earned. She doesn't come to talk. She comes swinging, summoning water clones to try and end this before it becomes a real problem for her. For about 3 seconds, it looks like a fight. Then Jian shreds every single clone without even really trying, and Sophie's entire confident, superior demeanor evaporates on the spot. She doesn't finish the fight, she doesn't even attempt round 2. She drops to her knees, completely terrified, and runs. That's twice now one of the untouchable 12 has folded the second real pressure showed up. Keep that pattern in mind, because it's about to get a lot more public and a lot more humiliating. Enter the Drachma Floating Auction, an extravagant, high society event where the ultra-rich bid obscene amounts of money on relics and rare items, the kind of place where showing off matters more than actual power. And who's in attendance, flexing hard? Stephen Marker, the Leo Saint. A guy whose entire personality is built around one insecurity. He has never, not once, managed to feel like he measures up to Jian. So when Jian's old bone weapon, the actual weapon from his glory days, presumed lost or destroyed, shows up on the auction block, Stephen can't resist. He throws down $1 billion to own it. Not because he needs it, because owning a piece of the man he's always been jealous of feels, to him, like finally winning. He does not get to enjoy that win for very long. Calamities crash the auction. Real threats, real danger, panic spreading through a crowd of people who've never had to actually fight for their lives. Jian steps in and clears the danger without hesitation, because saving people isn't something his grudge changes about him. But once the threat's handled, he's got one more thing to take care of. He walks up to Stephen, who's still riding high off owning a literal piece of his rival's legend, and calmly crushes the $1 billion bone weapon into dust with his bare hands. No ceremony, no speech. Just crumbles it like it's nothing, right in front of the man who paid a fortune for it. Stephen's face in that moment, I wish you could see it. All that money, all that ego, turned to powder in about 2 seconds. Then, because apparently crushing the trophy wasn't quite enough closure, Jian grabs Stephen and throws him. Not shoves. Throws. Like a bowling ball. Straight through the floor. That's the billionaire moment from the top of this video. Now you've got the full picture. Right after that mess, there's a smaller, quieter beat that shows a different side of what Jian's capable of. Yoha, Hugo's daughter, the one who's already claimed she's marrying him, gets caught in an attack from something called an illusion race calamity. Dangerous, disorienting, the kind of monster that messes with your head before it ever lays a hand on you. Jian doesn't just fight it off, he purifies it. Turns a genuine threat into a harmless little pet lizard. It's a small moment, almost gentle compared to everything else, but it says something important. This isn't a man who only knows how to destroy things. He's precise, controlled. He chooses what happens to the things in his path. That control gets put to a much harder test almost immediately. Jian crashes the Aquarius faction's press conference, the one where Sophie's supposed to be doing damage control after her humiliating retreat, and things escalate fast when the Cancer Saint shows up, Junlu Morin. And June isn't just another name on the list of betrayers. June is the one who actually did it. The one who put the blade in Jian's back 20 years ago. The literal hand behind that orange peeler stab wound that started this entire nightmare. So when these two finally collide, it's not just another fight. It's personal, in a way nothing else in this story has been yet. And Jian doesn't hold back. He tears the man's divine core straight out of his body, takes the source of his power away by force, in front of everyone. But June doesn't go quietly. Dying, desperate, and furious, he triggers a set of orbital missiles as a final act of spite, a last attempt to make sure that even in defeat, he takes something with him. Jian doesn't panic. He grabs Sophie, the same Aquarius saint who fled from him earlier, and forces her to use her powers to melt down the first incoming missile before it can do any damage. Then, with the remaining fragments still falling, he does something almost unthinkable. He teleports them, mid-air, directly onto the Gemini Temple. Precision, payback, 2 birds, 1 falling missile. That single move sets up the next collision, one involving a goddess, a boy who's about to throw away everything he was raised to believe in, and a scene where an entire divine bloodline gets its power supply cut like a plug pulled from the wall. But that story needs room to breathe, so let's pick it up right there. The Gemini Temple is still smoking from those missile fragments when Jian makes his next move, and this one hits closer to home than anything so far. Because it's not just about him anymore. See, Jian needs answers. He needs his money back, and he needs to know who's actually pulling strings behind 12 supposed heroes who couldn't organize a betrayal this clean on their own. So he storms straight into the government office tied to the Gemini faction, and the Gemini Saint doesn't last long against him. Doesn't matter how prepared she thinks she is, Jian takes her down and walks away with her spirit summon. One more piece of stolen power going back where it belongs. That should be the end of that chapter. It's not. Because Sunjai, the teenage disciple who's been idolizing Jian since the very beginning, the kid who first showed him just how badly the world twisted the truth, makes a choice that changes everything for him personally. He rips his Gemini badge off his own chest and throws it on the ground, in front of his own god. In front of everyone. Picture that for a second. A kid raised his whole life to worship a goddess, taught that she's divine, untouchable, worthy of total devotion, and he looks at everything Jian's exposed, everything the 12 heroes actually did, and decides loyalty to a lie isn't loyalty at all. He picks the dead man over the goddess, picks truth over comfort. The Gemini goddess does not take this well. Freya, furious, humiliated in front of her own followers, decides the appropriate response to a teenager quitting her fan club is execution. She moves to kill Sunjai. Not scare him, not punish him. Kill him, right there, for the crime of telling the truth. And that's the moment Jian stops treating this like a personal grudge and starts treating it like war. He doesn't just fight Freya. He does something far more devastating. He uses a power called Abyssal Cut, the ability to sever the actual connection between a god and their believers, the invisible thread that lets a deity draw strength from human faith in the first place. Jian swings, and just like that, the bond snaps. Every single Gemini follower on the planet, every disciple, every priest, every person who's ever prayed to her, goes dark, powerless, instantly. It's less like winning a fight and more like flipping a breaker switch on an entire religion. Freya loses her mind. A goddess getting cut off from her power source mid-fight isn't something she's built to handle gracefully, and she doesn't. She fully manifests, unleashing everything she has left in one desperate, furious lunge. Jian meets her with a forged scythe, and actually wounds her, draws blood from an honest-to-God deity. And that's such a massive violation of divine order that the other gods can't just stand by and watch anymore. They physically step in, chain her up, and drag her away before she does something that breaks the rules governing what gods are even allowed to do to mortals. Let that sink in for a second. 20 years ago, this man couldn't even get a god to notice him. Now the gods are intervening because he's winning too hard. Sunjai walks away from that whole nightmare having lost his faction, his badge, and his god's favor. But he's standing next to the guy who was actually telling the truth the whole time, and that trade is starting to look like the best decision of his life. So that's 3 of the 12 down. Aries, humiliated and stuffed. Aquarius, terrified into submission. Cancer, dead. Gemini, powerless and disgraced. And somewhere out there, still hiding behind the other saints, is whoever actually orchestrated the entire 20-year cover-up in the first place, because both June and the Capricorn saint have been dropping the same name under pressure, Virgo. We'll get there. First, there's a beach, a monster with way too many arms, and one more saint who's about to have a very bad day. The Thousand Arms Calamity is exactly what it sounds like. A massive octopus-type threat currently tearing through a beach raid. Tentacles everywhere, chaos everywhere, the kind of monster that earns its color-coded threat rank the hard way. Awakened fighters are already there trying to hold the line, and it is not going well. Jian crashes the raid like he's arriving fashionably late to his own party. He doesn't ease into this fight. He goes straight through it, cutting through limb after limb, closing distance fast, treating a monster that could probably level a pier by itself like a chore he wants finished quickly. This isn't a struggle, this is a formality with tentacles, and in the middle of that beach, guess who else shows up? Vladimir, the Capricorn saint, the old crafter who years ago stole Jian's hammer, one of the last major stolen relics still out there. He's got a bomb rigged, some last-ditch desperate move meant to either save face or take Jian down with him. Jian doesn't even flinch. He turns that bomb into fireworks. Just diffuses the entire threat and turns it into a harmless light show, right there on the beach, in front of everyone watching. If you wanted a visual for how far the gap has grown between Jian and the people who used to call themselves his equals, that's it. His enemy's last resort becomes party decorations. Steven's there too, because apparently he just can't stay away from getting humiliated near water. Jian tosses him aside without a second thought, an afterthought compared to the actual target. Then he gets to Vladimir, doesn't kill him, doesn't even really hurt him that badly compared to what he did to June. He takes him hostage instead, because Vladimir is a source, and Jian wants information more than he wants another body count. He gets his hammer back, his actual crafting hammer, stolen right alongside everything else 2 decades ago, and with Vladimir secured, he finally starts pulling on the one thread that matters most right now. Who is Virgo, and how deep does this conspiracy actually go? Because here's the thing nobody's said out loud yet. 12 people don't coordinate a betrayal this precise, this total, without someone organizing it. Someone smart enough to steal a legacy and rewrite history clean enough that it held for 20 straight years. Cancer knew a name. Capricorn knows more than he's saying. And Jian is done being patient about finding out who's really been hiding at the top of this whole thing. 4 saints down, 8 left standing, and somewhere among them, or maybe above them, is the person who planned all of this from the very beginning. The one who's about to learn that burying a man alive for 20 years doesn't actually kill him. Sometimes it just makes him a lot harder to stop. The beach is still smoking, salt water steaming off broken tentacle chunks, and Vladimir's sitting there in Jian's grip, like a man who just realized his entire retirement plan involved being on the winning side forever. Turns out that plan had a pretty big flaw in it. Let's actually slow down for a second here, because this interrogation matters more than people probably expect. Vladimir isn't like Yang Wei. He's not some loud, arrogant brawler who folds the second real pressure shows up. He's old, genuinely old, the kind of old that comes with decades of crafting experience, decades of watching younger, flashier saints rise and fall while he quietly kept his head down and built things. He made Jian's old hammer, way back before any of this went sideways. Which means he knows exactly what that weapon is worth, and exactly how badly he's about to need a good answer for why it ended up in his workshop instead of 6 feet under a collapsed mountain with its owner. Jian doesn't waste time on threats, doesn't need to. He just holds up the hammer, his hammer, freshly reclaimed, and asks one very simple question. Who told you I was dead? And Vladimir, old crafter, self-preservation instincts sharper than his combat instincts ever were, does the smart thing. He starts talking. He confirms what June let slip before his core got ripped out and what Vladimir himself had clearly been dancing around this entire time. There was a plan. A real one. Not 12 saints spontaneously deciding to betray their strongest member on a whim during the chaos of a raid gone right. Someone organized it. Someone mapped out exactly when Jian would be most exposed, exactly which teammate had the stomach to actually swing the blade, exactly how to seal the cave and make sure there'd be no way out. And every single lead, every whispered name Vladimir's willing to give up, points to the same place, Virgo. Here's the thing about the Virgo saint that makes this so unsettling. Nobody talks about them much. Not because they're weak, because they're careful. While Yang Wei was busy being loud and greedy, while Sophie was busy being vain, while Steven was busy nursing an inferiority complex he probably needed years of therapy for, Virgo apparently just watched, planned, stayed clean. Let the other 11 take the public glory while quietly making sure the real threat, the one man who could expose the entire lie, never made it back out of that tower. Vladimir doesn't know everything. He's clear about that, and honestly, the fact that he's not pretending to know more than he does is probably the only reason Jian doesn't take this further than he needs to. But what Vladimir does know is enough to turn 8 saints left into something a lot more specific. 8 saints left, and one of them has been running this whole operation from the shadows since before the Crimson Eye raid even happened. That's a different kind of enemy than anything Jian's faced so far. Yang Wei folded because he was a coward. Sophie folded because she was scared. Steven got humiliated because his ego wrote checks his skill couldn't cash. June died because he underestimated exactly how much damage a man he stabbed in the back 20 years ago could still do. Virgo hasn't shown their face once. Not at the auction. Not at the press conference. Not at the temple. Not on the beach. Not anywhere Jian's left a trail of destruction over the past however many days since he walked out of that tower. And in a story built entirely around loud, satisfying comeuppance, an enemy who refuses to show up for their own reckoning is somehow the scariest thing yet. Let's back up though, because there's a piece of this beach raid worth slowing down on. The actual fight against the Thousand Arms calamity, before Vladimir even entered the picture. Picture the scale of this thing. Color-coded threat rankings exist for a reason in this world. Blue calamities are basically a Tuesday for trained fighters. Green ones need a coordinated team. Yellow starts getting genuinely dangerous. Orange can level city blocks. Red requires serious firepower. and usually a saint-level presence just to contain, and black is reserved for the kind of monster that gets its own emergency broadcast. Thousand Arms sits high on that scale, high enough that an entire beach full of professional awakened fighters was struggling to hold a perimeter before Jian even arrived. Tentacles the size of city buses, suction strong enough to pull a fully armored fighter clean off their feet from 30 yards out. And it's fast, genuinely fast for something that size, which is exactly the kind of surprise that gets rescue teams killed. Jian doesn't approach it like a boss fight, he approaches it like pest control. First tentacle comes at him, he doesn't dodge it so much as redirect it, using its own momentum to swing himself past the strike zone and close distance in one motion. Second one wraps around his leg, big mistake, because it just gives him something to yank on, using the monster's own grip to pull himself into range for a strike that takes the limb clean off at the joint. Third, fourth, fifth. He's not even tracking count anymore. He's just moving, cutting, closing gaps, treating 8 or 9 limbs flailing at him from every angle like background noise instead of a threat. The other fighters on that beach, the ones who were losing ground 5 minutes earlier, just stop. Stop fighting, stop retreating, just watch, because what they're seeing doesn't compute. A red-tier calamity that was actively winning a coordinated engagement gets reduced to twitching stumps by one guy who showed up without so much as a warm-up. That's the gap. That's what everyone keeps learning the hard way, one saint at a time. 20 years of digging himself back out of a hole did something to Jian that no amount of divine blessing ever managed for the 12 people who left him there. And when the monster's finally down, thrashing its last, Jian doesn't even really finish it with ceremony. He just ends it. Efficient. Almost bored. Like the real threat on this beach was never the octopus in the first place. It was always going to be whichever saint showed up hoping the chaos would give them cover. That saint, of course, being Vladimir. Which brings us right back to where we started this chunk. An old man with a bomb, a stolen hammer, and a name he really didn't want to say out loud. Speaking of the bomb, let's actually sit with that moment too, because it deserves more than a passing mention. Vladimir's play, when he realizes he's cornered, is about what you'd expect from a crafter. Not brute strength, not raw combat skill, but a device. Something rigged, something meant to either force a standoff or take Jian down alongside him if things go really wrong. It's the kind of desperate last resort you'd expect from someone who spent decades building things instead of training to punch harder than the guy next to him. Jian looks at it, looks at Vladimir's face, that mix of defiance and barely hidden terror, and instead of destroying it outright or backing off, he does something almost insulting in how casually he handles it. He redirects the device's output, turns the explosive charge into something harmless, and lets it go off anyway. Except now it's not a bomb. It's fireworks. Bright, colorful, completely pointless fireworks, bursting over a beach that 30 seconds earlier had a red-tier calamity thrashing across it. Vladimir's last-ditch weapon, the thing he was banking on to either kill Jian or buy himself an escape, turns into a light show for a crowd of stunned rescue workers and rattled beachgoers. You cannot design a more humiliating outcome than that. You bring a bomb to a fight against a man who casually crushed $1 billion weapon with his bare hands 2 arcs ago, and he doesn't even dignify it as a threat. He turns it into a party trick. Steven, because apparently the universe just refuses to let this man catch a break anywhere near water, is still recovering from getting thrown through a floor at the auction, and now he's caught in the blast radius of somebody else's failed bomb. Jian doesn't even really register him as a priority, just shoves him out of the way, an afterthought, barely worth the effort. If there's a more efficient way to communicate, you don't even register as a threat anymore, I haven't seen it, and that's the beach. Calamity dead, hammer reclaimed, Vladimir secured, Steven humiliated for what feels like the 3rd or 4th time now, and honestly, I've lost count and I'm guessing he has too. Let's talk about what this actually means going forward, because the story's shifting gears here. Up until this point, every St. Jian's confronted has been reactive. Yang Wei got caught off guard at a supermarket. Sophie got ambushed at a relic appraiser's. Steven walked straight into his own humiliation at an auction he chose to attend. June got confronted mid-press conference. Freya lost control in front of her own followers. These were all fights that happened because Jian showed up and circumstances lined up against the saint in question. Virgo is different. Virgo's the one name that keeps surfacing under interrogation, and Virgo's also the one saint who hasn't shown up anywhere. No public appearance, no attempt at damage control, no desperate last stand. Whoever they are, they've had every opportunity to make a move, and chosen instead to stay completely silent while their entire faction unravels around them. That's not fear. Cowards run. We've seen what that looks like. We watched Sophie do exactly that. This is something colder. This is patience. And patience from an enemy who apparently helped orchestrate a 20-year cover-up is a genuinely unsettling thing to sit with. Let's shift for a second, because there's a lighter thread running underneath all this carnage that deserves its own spotlight. Hugo, Yoha, and the ongoing disaster that is Hugo trying to process his daughter's crush on his resurrected best friend. See, up until the beach raid, Hugo's been dealing with this mostly through denial and panic. Every time Yoha brings up marrying Jian, Hugo finds some excuse to change the subject, distract her, physically insert himself into the conversation like a human wall. It hasn't worked. It was never going to work. Yoha's a fierce spear user, stubborn as anything, and once she's decided something, subtlety isn't really part of her strategy. After the illusion race calamity, the one Jian purified into a harmless pet lizard instead of just killing outright, Yoha's crush somehow gets worse, not better, because apparently watching a man turn a monster into a cute little companion instead of just obliterating it is exactly the kind of thing that seals a crush permanently. Hugo, for his part, has started treating every one of Jian's victories less like, my best friend is winning, and more like, my daughter's future husband keeps getting stronger, and I have no control over any of this. It's a small thread. It's not the main event. But it's exactly the kind of pressure valve this story needs. Because everything else happening around it is brutal, calculated, 20 years in the making violence, and every so often you need Hugo sputtering indignantly while his daughter calmly plans a wedding to humanity's strongest fighter to remind you this story still knows how to have fun with itself. Sunjai's adjusting too, in his own way. Walking away from the only faction he's ever known isn't something you just shrug off, even when the alternative is standing beside the guy who turned out to be telling the truth the entire time. He's watching Jian dismantle saint after saint, watching a system he was raised inside of get exposed as rotten from the top down, and he's processing all of it the way anyone would, with a mix of vindication and quiet unease about exactly how far this is going to go. Because here's the uncomfortable math nobody's said out loud yet. 4 saints down, 8 left, and Virgo's somewhere in that remaining 8, sitting quiet, waiting, while everyone else scrambles. The public reaction is starting to catch up too. That teddy bear stunt with Yang Wei wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Every media outlet on the planet got that image, and you don't send something like that out without expecting the world to start asking questions. Questions like, who actually did this? Questions like, if the Aries Saint got humiliated that easily, what does that say about the official story everyone's been told about the Crimson Eye raid? 20 years of carefully maintained mythology, and it's starting to crack in public, in real time, one exposed fraud at a time. Which brings us to the real turning point of where this story's about to go. Up until now, every fight's had an obvious, immediate target. A saint doing something visible. Something Jian could react to directly. Going forward, the hunt changes shape. It's not going to be about who shows up in front of him anymore. It's about who's been hiding, and why they've been hiding so well. Vladimir's still restrained, still talking when he's pushed, and every piece of information coming out of him is another thread pulling toward the same unavoidable conclusion. This was never 12 equal partners in one impulsive betrayal. This was one architect, and 11 people willing to go along with the plan, because the payoff was worth it. 11 people who are about to find out exactly how badly they miscalculated. Jian's not in a hurry, and that might be the most dangerous thing about him at this point. 20 years buried alive teaches a certain kind of patience that these saints, drowning in decades of comfort and unearned worship, never had to develop. He can afford to take his time working through the rest of them. He can afford to let Vladimir sweat, let the remaining 8 saints spiral trying to figure out who's next, let the public keep asking louder and louder questions about what actually happened all those years ago. Because at the end of all of it, there's still one name nobody's willing to say without flinching. One saint who planned a 20-year lie clean enough to survive the world's most scrutinized story. And Jian's coming for them with the same relentless, methodical focus that dug him out of a collapsed cave and turned him into something the old gods themselves have to physically restrain. 8 saints left. one architect hiding among them, and a man who's already proven, 4 times over now, that being untouchable was never the same thing as being safe. Reply, continue. Let's keep pushing. Same spot, no reintro. There's a piece of this whole comeback that's worth pulling apart properly, because it's the actual engine behind every single beatdown we've watched so far, the system running underneath Jian's power. See, in this world, being an awakened fighter isn't just, you got strong, good for you. There's structure to it. Disciples get ranked, B, A, S, SS. And that ranking isn't cosmetic. It determines what kind of monsters you're cleared to fight, what resources your faction gives you, how much respect you get walking into a room. Climbing from B to A takes most people years of grinding. Climbing into SS territory, that's rare enough that entire factions build their reputation around having even one. Jian's operating on something that doesn't fit anywhere on that chart, because his power isn't tied to any of the 12 gods handing out blessings. It's tied to a 13th seat. A constellation that, as far as this story's ever established, didn't exist before whatever happened to him during those 20 years underground. Here's what that actually gives him, mechanically, because it's worth breaking down instead of just watching the results. There's a progression system running under everything. Quiet, background, almost like a game keeping score. Beat a calamity, clear a threat, expose a fraud, and there's growth happening whether or not anyone else can see it. It's the reason each fight in this story doesn't just look satisfying, it feels like it's building towards something bigger every single time. Then there's the workshop. This is the part that ties directly back to Vladimir, actually. Because Jian's own crafting ability, his creation workshop, is what let him forge and upgrade gear using monster parts and salvaged relics, even back when he still had a body held together with willpower and scar tissue. That's partly why losing his hammer to Vladimir stung as much as it did. It wasn't just a weapon, it was proof of a skill set the old world tried to bury along with him. And then there's the ability that probably explains best how he's been running through Saints without breaking stride, the 13th sense. The power to see weak points, not guess at them, not study an opponent for an hour and slowly work them out. See them, directly, like every enemy's walking around with a target painted somewhere on their body, and Jian's the only one in the room who can actually read it. Combine all three, constant growth from every fight, a crafting system that turns stolen relics and monster parts into new gear, and a literal sixth sense for exactly where to hit, and you start understanding why none of this has felt like a fair fight. It was never supposed to. That's the entire point of a comeback story like this one. 20 years of being powerless doesn't end with the guy coming back even. It ends with the guy coming back operating on a completely different scale than the people who wronged him. And then there's the ability that's honestly done the most damage on a structural level, Abyssal Cut. We saw it in action against Freya, severing her connection to every believer she had in one motion, but it's worth sitting with what that actually represents in the bigger picture of this story. Gods in this world don't just exist because they're powerful. They exist because people believe in them. Worship, faith, whatever you want to call it, that's the fuel. Every disciple praying to a saint's patron god, every follower attending a temple, every ounce of devotion poured into the 12 zodiac system, that's literally powering the divine side of this equation. It's not abstract. It's a resource, flowing constantly from believer to god. Abyssal Cut doesn't just wound a god, it cuts the fuel line. And that's a genuinely terrifying ability to have access to if you're one of the remaining 8 saints, because it means Jian doesn't need to outfight every single deity backing them. He can just reach past the saint entirely and go straight for the source. Think about what that means for someone like Virgo. If the eventual confrontation comes down to raw power, sure, that's one kind of fight. But if Jian gets close enough to use Abyssal Cut on whichever god Virgo answers to, the entire foundation of their power just disappears. No amount of careful planning, no amount of staying hidden for 20 years, protects against having your actual power source unplugged mid-fight. That's the shadow hanging over every remaining saint right now, whether they've openly shown themselves yet or not. It's not just the strongest fighter in the world is back and he's angry. It's the strongest fighter in the world is back, he's angry, and he's got a move that makes divine backing completely irrelevant. Let's circle back to the calamities for a second too, because it's worth understanding exactly what these color rankings mean in practical terms. since it makes every fight so far hit that much harder in hindsight. Blue-tier threats are basically training exercises, dangerous to civilians, sure, but routine for any half-decent awakened fighter. Green starts requiring actual coordination, usually a small team working together instead of one person going solo. Yellow's where things get genuinely risky even for trained fighters. Injuries become common, and casualties start showing up in the reports. Orange is a different category entirely. These are the threats that level buildings, that require evacuation orders, that make the news even in a world where monster attacks happen regularly enough to barely register as news anymore. Red is where you start needing saint-level intervention just to contain the situation, let alone resolve it cleanly. And black calamities are rare enough, dangerous enough, that their appearance alone triggers emergency response protocols across entire regions. Thousand Arms sat high enough on that scale that an entire beach's worth of professional fighters was losing ground before Jian even arrived. Queen Spider, tearing through a crowded supermarket, wasn't some minor pest problem either. That's exactly the kind of threat that gets people killed in large numbers if the right person doesn't show up in time. And Jian's cleared both of them essentially solo, without visible strain, in the middle of also dismantling 4 separate saints and their entire public reputations. That's not just impressive within this story's internal logic. That's the kind of gap that makes you understand exactly why the 12 Saints were so desperate to make sure he never came back. They didn't betray an equal, they betrayed someone who was always operating on a different level, and spent 20 years hoping the truth of that would just stay buried along with him. It didn't stay buried. And now every one of them is finding out, one by one, exactly how much of a mistake that assumption was. Let's take a second and really sit with Sunjai's arc here too, because it's easy to treat him as a side character in a story this loaded with payback and power fantasy, but what he's going through deserves more weight than that. This is a kid who was raised inside the Gemini faction's entire belief structure, taught from childhood that Freya was divine, that the 12 Saints were the pinnacle of what a hero could be, that the great sacrifice during the Crimson Eye raid was proof of everything noble about the system he was born into. Every part of his worldview was built on a story that turned out to be a cover-up for murder and theft. And when the truth cracked open in front of him, he didn't cling to the comfortable version. He didn't rationalize it, didn't try to find some way to keep believing while quietly ignoring the evidence piling up. He took off his badge, in front of his own goddess, knowing exactly what that kind of defiance could cost him, and he chose the truth instead. That takes something most adults in this story never managed to summon. 11 Saints spent 20 years benefiting from a lie, and never once cracked under the weight of it. One teenage disciple heard the truth, and couldn't live with pretending otherwise, even when the cost was nearly his life. That's why watching Freya come after him hits as hard as it does. It's not just villain attacks side character for shock value, it's the system itself trying to punish the one person young enough, honest enough, to actually reject it outright. And it's why Jian cutting Freya's connection to her entire following in that moment feels less like overkill and more like exactly the right amount of force for what she was about to do. Now, stepping back from the deep dive, where does all this actually leave things heading forward? 8 Saints remain. 4 are gone in one form or another. Yang Wei stuffed and robbed. Sophie humiliated into hiding. June dead with his core torn out. Freya defanged and dragged off by the very gods she used to stand among. Vladimir's neutralized, restrained, talking. That's 5, technically, counting Capricorn, which means the real count still standing without direct confrontation sits at 7. Somewhere in those 7 is Virgo, patient, careful, unseen through every single one of these confrontations, letting the others take the public fall while staying completely insulated from consequence. And based on everything June let slip before he died, everything Vladimir's confirmed under pressure, Virgo isn't just another name on a list. Virgo's the reason there was a list to begin with. That's a fundamentally different kind of threat than anything Jian's faced since walking out of that tower. Every confrontation so far has had an obvious shape: show up, expose the fraud, dismantle them, move to the next name. Virgo doesn't offer that shape. Virgo's spent 20 years mastering the art of staying exactly out of reach, and that kind of discipline doesn't crack the same way Yang Wei's cowardice did, or Steven's ego, or Sophie's fear. But here's the thing worth remembering about a man who spent 2 decades buried alive, slowly rebuilding himself from nothing, while an entire world moved on without him. Patience was never going to be his weakness. If anything, It's the exact skill 20 years underground trained into him better than any of his so-called comrades ever managed. 7 saints left, one architect among them still hiding, still confident nobody's close enough to touch them. They're wrong about that. They just don't know it yet. Somewhere, away from the beach, away from the cameras, away from every single disaster we just watched unfold, someone's calm, not scared, not scrambling, not sending panicked messages to the other saints asking what the plan is now that 4 of their own have been stuffed, shredded, killed, or dragged off in chains. Just calm, watching. Like all of this, every bit of chaos, every exposed fraud, every humiliating headline is going exactly the way they expected it to. That's Virgo, and that's the problem. Because everyone else on that list of 12 broke the second real pressure hit them. Yang Wei folded into a teddy bear. Sophie ran crying from a fight she started. Steven's ego got crushed alongside $1 billion worth of bone. Freya lost total control of herself in front of her own worshippers. These are people who spent 20 years coasting on stolen glory, and the second the real thing showed back up, none of them had an answer for it. Virgo's the one name that hasn't cracked, hasn't shown up, hasn't panicked publicly, hasn't sent guards, hasn't done a single thing you'd expect from someone watching their entire conspiracy collapse in real time. And the scarier thought underneath all of that is simple. Maybe they don't feel like it's collapsing at all. Maybe this was already accounted for. Let's talk about what's actually happening outside the fights. Because up until now, this story's been so busy delivering one beatdown after another that the world's reaction has barely gotten room to breathe. And it's about time it did. That photo of Yang Wei sealed inside a teddy bear didn't just embarrass one saint. It went everywhere. Every media outlet, every feed, every screen in a world that has spent 20 years building shrines to 12 heroes who supposedly gave everything to save humanity. And now here's proof. Undeniable, viral, impossible to spin, that one of those heroes just got treated like a misbehaving toddler by someone the official record says died in the Crimson Eye raid. People are asking questions now, real ones. If Yang Wei folded that easily, was the original story even true? If the sacrifice everyone was taught to worship happened the way the 12 told it, why does the guy who supposedly died keep showing up and dismantling them one at a time? 20 years of mythology, and it's cracking apart in public, in real time, one headline at a time, and every new saint that falls just adds fuel to a fire the remaining 7 can't put out no matter how hard their PR teams try. That's the pressure Virgo's sitting inside of right now. Not physical pressure, Jian hasn't come knocking yet. Public pressure, the kind that erodes an entire belief system from underneath, one exposed lie at a time, whether or not the person responsible ever gets directly confronted. Back with Jian's side of things, there's a quieter moment worth sitting in before the next hunt kicks off. Because even a man running on pure momentum needs a beat to actually process what he's rebuilding. Hugo's been folding Jian back into his life like no time passed at all, which, given the alternative, Jian clearly appreciates more than he'd ever admit out loud. Sunjai's adjusting to a world outside the only faction he's ever known, and it's not easy. Losing your entire social structure over one act of integrity rarely is. But every time he watches Jian take down another fraud, it reinforces that he picked the right side, even if the right side comes with a much smaller support system than the one he left behind. And Yoha has not slowed down even slightly. If anything, watching Jian purify a monster into a pet lizard instead of just crushing it outright seems to have convinced her this is a permanently locked decision. She's already treating the relationship as basically inevitable, which means Hugo's stuck in a permanent state of low-grade panic that shows zero signs of improving anytime soon. It's a small thread. It's not the main event. But in a story this loaded with vengeance and violence, it's doing real work keeping things from tipping into pure grimness. 7 saints left. One of them's been running the whole operation since before Jian ever got thrown into that cave. And whoever they are, they're about to learn the same lesson every other name on that list already did. Staying hidden only works until the man who spent 20 years learning patience finally decides it's your turn.